How would you feel if you found out that those you trusted the most had betrayed you in the most cruel way? How do you survive the realization that the person you gave your heart to and your own child, for whom you sacrificed everything, have secretly become lovers? Is there a limit after which even the most stable mind cannot withstand and emotions take over? Is it possible to survive such a blow without consequences? This story is about a betrayal that ended with a gunshot. But was it real retribution? Or was it just the beginning of an even bigger tragedy? Celeste Martin was never like other children. She grew up in a reality where any weakness was perceived not just as a flaw, but as a target to be destroyed. Her father, Colonel Raymond Martin, devoted his entire life to serving in the Army. For him, discipline was not only a method of controlling his subordinates, but also the only proper way to raise his daughter. From an early age, Celeste learned one rule: to survive, you have to be strong. It was not a choice. It was a law that her father repeated over and over again. If you are weak, you become a target, he would say every time she hesitated, made a mistake, or tried to object. Don't trust anyone 100%. People betray. Always. Strict discipline reigned in their home. Up at 5 in the morning, jogging at 5 in the morning, followed by grueling physical exercises and control of studies. Mistakes were unforgivable. If you did something wrong, you had to correct it immediately. Otherwise, the consequences were inevitable. Tears were never accepted as an argument. Even her mother, Margaret, never contradicted her husband. She didn't express her feelings, didn't try to change anything. She just silently fulfilled her role. Celeste learned from childhood not to cry, not to show fear, not to seek support. She realized one thing: if you want to achieve something in life, you have to fight alone. When she turned 18, her father did not even ask her opinion. He just said, "You're going to join the Army." She did not object. It seemed like a logical extension of her life, something she had been preparing for since early childhood. The military training was brutal, but she endured. Other girls who joined with her gave up after the first week. She did not. The men who initially mocked her and doubted her endurance soon changed their attitude. She proved that she was stronger than many of them. After 20 years of service, she retired. But Celeste was not just a soldier. She thought like a strategist. She learned how to read people, predict their actions, and calculate the situation several steps ahead. After leaving the Army, she decided to use these skills in business. Her IT company quickly became a success. She was in control of everything: her career, her finances, her life. Her every move was planned like a military operation, but even those who are used to absolute control have weaknesses. Charles Martin was the only person she allowed to get close to her. A former military man, he understood her better than anyone else. He did not try to change her, did not demand more than she could give. They spoke the same language, a language of logic, discipline, and trust that didn't require any extra words. And yet one day he was gone. A car accident. He fell asleep at the wheel, the car went off the road and crashed. It happened instantly, without warning. Celeste did not cry. She did what she had always done. She pulled herself together, accepted reality, and moved on. She was left with only Tiara. When her father died, Tiara was only 3 years old. Celeste made a promise to herself to do everything she could to give her daughter the best life possible. She paid for prestigious schools, bought expensive clothes, and provided her with everything she could. Her studies, friends, plans for the future, everything was under her control. But something went wrong. The more she tried to control Tiara's life, the more she resisted. She wanted freedom. She wanted to make her own decisions. It seemed to her that her mother did not give her a choice, that she was strangling her with her rules. At first, these were minor quarrels, but gradually they turned into constant scandals. "I want to live the way I decide. I'm doing it for you. In fact, you just want me to become your copy." When Tiara turned 18, she began to pull away. She used her mother's money but acted as if she didn't need her advice. Her friends changed. People appeared whom Celeste did not approve of. And then Derek Walker appeared. From that moment on, Celeste's life began to fall apart. It wasn't a chance meeting in a bar or a romantic encounter in a coffee shop. Derek Walker came into her world quietly, confidently, like a man who knew exactly what he was doing. She was 52 when she saw him for the first time, a self-confident, powerful woman who was used to being in control. He was 37. He had that rare type of male charisma that didn't require proof. Calm, reserved, he made you feel as if he understood you better than anyone else. Women believed that they were the only ones for him. They met at a charity event where a mutual friend brought him. Derek Walker was a financial advisor who worked with wealthy clients. But his real skill was not just in managing money. He knew how to win the trust of people who usually did not trust anyone. He had a keen sense of psychology and knew that everyone has a weakness. Celeste was not the type of woman to let someone into her life easily, but Derek didn't pressure her, didn't rush her, didn't try to impress her with money or status. She wasn't someone who could be impressed by that. He simply said, "I know what it means to be strong and lonely at the same time. You control everything, but who controls you? I'll help you let go of the tension." He didn't use the standard phrases that men usually use to charm a woman. His words went straight to the point, to the thoughts that Celeste had never voiced out loud. His voice was calm, confident, and devoid of pressure. He did not rush things, did not demand anything. He just waited. And it worked. A few meetings later, she allowed herself something she hadn't felt for a long time: trust. Derek was there for her just as much as she needed him. No unnecessary questions, no unnecessary intrusiveness, and without drama. He created the perfect illusion of security. When they started living together, Celeste believed that she had finally found balance. She continued to control her company and manage the finances, but for the first time in years, she allowed herself to share responsibility with someone else. Derek didn't try to force changes on her. He acted gently, carefully, discreetly. At first, he made small suggestions. "Let's open a joint account for our travel and expenses. I can take care of your finances because you always lack time for that." He didn't ask for money, didn't insist, didn't force me. He simply convinced me that it was natural to trust him. And then came more serious financial decisions: transferring part of her assets to accounts that he could manage, joint investments that would be beneficial for both of them. "Let me take over some of the management of the business. It will be easier for you." Celeste didn't notice when he got access to her money, but it had already become a reality. While Derek seemed like the perfect partner for her at first, for Tiara he immediately became someone she wanted to be by her side. He didn't limit her, didn't impose his opinions, didn't set rules. He knew that it was important for her to feel free, to have the right to make her own decisions. "You are much smarter than your mother thinks you are. I understand that she can be too strict, but she just doesn't know any better. You have the right to live the way you choose." He waited, and it worked. He didn't make her doubt her mother or herself. He simply gave her something she had never received from Celeste: the feeling of being heard and understood. Over time, Tiara became his ally. She trusted Derek more than her own mother. Even before he came into their lives, Celeste had never been a person who maintained close ties. She didn't open up even to those she could call friends, and she didn't trust anyone completely. But Derek made this isolation perfect. At first, it seemed like a small thing. "This friend is just taking advantage of you. Why do you need her? You do realize that most people in the business are jealous of you, right? I've seen the way they look at you. They're not friends. They want to control you." He skillfully sowed seeds of doubt and created conflicts, gradually forcing her to abandon her usual contacts. Over time, most of her friends disappeared from her life, and when she realized that she was alone, it was too late. This evening did not bode well for her. Celeste was sitting in her office, reviewing the company's financial reports, when the doorbell rang unexpectedly. Standing on the doorstep was Mrs. Loretta Green, their neighbor, a woman in her 60s who lived across the street. Always polite, she never interfered in other people's affairs, so her visit at such a late hour seemed strange to Celeste. "I need to talk to you." Loretta spoke quietly, and her eyes were intense. Celeste invited her in, but the woman shook her head. "I won't be long. It's just, I saw Derek and Tiara." At first, Celeste didn't understand what she was getting at. "You saw them?" "They were together, at the Regency Inn. I happened to be walking by and saw them go in." Loretta spoke cautiously, as if she was afraid that her words might cause a storm. You must have made a mistake. No, Celeste. I saw them clearly. They were together. Something cold and sharp, like fear, slipped into her mind, but she immediately dismissed the thought. They must have been doing something. Loretta remained silent, staring at her with a long, piercing gaze, as if she were waiting for a different reaction. Then she sighed. I just thought you should know about it. When the door closed behind her neighbor, Celeste stood in the hallway for a long time. Something inside her began to crack. The next day she sat in her office, but her thoughts were dissolving in her head, making it impossible to concentrate on her work. Her mind told her that there was no reason to worry. Tiara and Derek often spent time together. They could buy a gift, take care of some business, or just meet someone at the hotel. But this thought never left her. She remembered how their conversations had become short lately, how Derek had changed. He had become more cautious and distant. That same day, she turned to a private detective. Mark Davis was a former police investigator who had long worked in the private sector. He had a reputation for not asking too many questions, but always finding the answers. I want to know if they're seeing each other behind my back. He looked at her carefully. Do you have any specific suspicions? Details? A neighbor saw them at the hotel, but I need proof. Mark nodded. Give me a week. He returned 6 days later. Silently, he placed the folder in front of her. It's all in here. Celeste opened it. Inside were photographs, printouts of messages, restaurant receipts, and surveillance footage. Now everything was clear. The affair between Derek and Tiara lasted at least 6 months. Celeste sat motionless, flipping through the documents. Every page, every photo, every small detail hit her consciousness like a sharp blade cutting her reality into pieces. But even now, she could not accept it. She needed to see everything with her own eyes. A week later, she returned home 3 hours earlier than usual. The door was unlocked. The house greeted her with silence. But as soon as she climbed the stairs, she heard sounds that made her stop. Laughter, a soft woman's whisper, muffled moans. Each sound reverberated painfully in her head, like a blow that wouldn't let her recover. She took a step forward. Barely breathing, she opened the door. What she saw erased all her thoughts. On her bed, in her bedroom, were Derek and Tiara, her husband, her daughter. Tiara was half naked, her hair falling around her shoulders. Derek was sitting next to her, holding her tightly, his lips sliding down her neck. The blood froze in her veins. She looked at them, but her brain refused to accept reality. This just couldn't be happening. It couldn't be true. Something inside her cracked, split, crumbled, and the silence became unbearable. Tiara was the first to cry out, "Mom, it's not like you think." Derek, on the other hand, remained calm. He slowly stood up, wiped his lips with the back of his hand, and looked directly at Celeste. There was no fear in his eyes. "Celeste, you need to calm down." His tone sounded like an order, but she could no longer hear his voice. "You brought us to this point." Derek stepped forward. "You've been in control, always. You never let Tiara be herself. She's not your daughter, she's your project." Celeste took a step back. Her mind refused to accept his words. Tiara cried, repeating through her tears, "Mom, it's not true. It's not true. It's not true." But Derek did not stop. His voice sounded deep, cold, confident. "It's all your fault. You've always wanted to control everything, even her. You built this world and now you're surprised that it's falling apart?" She didn't remember when her fingers gripped the cold metal. She couldn't remember exactly how she pulled the gun out of the dresser. But when she heard his voice again, the same tone of voice, full of superiority, as if he were still in control of the situation, as if he was telling her how to live her life, her finger pulled the trigger on its own. There was a dull shot. Derek staggered to his knees, his mouth twitching in a convulsive gasp. Blood gushed from his chest. Tiara screamed. And then there was silence. There was only her steady, deep breathing and her motionless body in the middle of the room. An oppressive silence hung over the space, destroying everything that had happened just a few minutes ago. Tiara stood in the corner, pressed tightly against the wall. Her face was white and her gaze was blank. Her eyes were staring at the lifeless body on the floor, but it seemed that she still didn't realize what had just happened. Derek was no longer moving. His body was slowly settling, blood dripping from his chest, spreading in a thick, dark stain on the wooden floor. The gun in Celeste's hand was still warm. She kept her gaze on Derek's motionless body, her face impenetrable, like a soldier's after a battle. Suddenly, a loud sound brought her back to reality, a call to the police. "Hello, please, we need help!" Tiara's voice was trembling as she stood across the room, clutching the phone with both hands. "He's dead! My stepfather! My mom! She shot him!" The operator asked something, but the girl just sobbed and repeated the same thing. "Please hurry! He's not moving! He's dead!" Celeste made no move to stop her. She didn't take the phone away. She didn't try to explain anything. She slowly walked over to the dresser, carefully placed the gun on the wooden surface, and sighed. Everything had been decided. The game was on. A few seconds later, almost without realizing her actions, Tiara put the phone back to her ear and dialed another number. "We need an ambulance." 7 minutes later, sirens broke the silence of the night. A loud knock on the door. Voices. "Police! Open up now!" Celeste took a few leisurely steps into the hallway, touched the doorknob, and opened the door without hesitation. 3 policemen stood on the threshold. Their eyes instantly stopped at the bloody footprints stretching across the floor and then focused on her face. "Madam, raise your hands and step back." She complied without any resistance. "He's in the bedroom. I shot him." Her voice sounded flat, without any emotion. Behind the police officers, medics were already moving in. They quickly passed her and went up the stairs. But Celeste knew there was no one to save. One of the policemen walked cautiously forward, checking the rooms. After a few seconds, he nodded to his partner. "Room on the right. The body's confirmed." The doctor's voice came from the second floor. "He's dead. Gunshot wound to the chest. Death instantaneous." Celeste closed her eyes for a second. She did not react. They put her in a car and drove her to the police station. For a moment, she imagined Tiara still standing there on the second floor, with her hands shaking and clasped to her face. But she didn't care about that anymore. The interrogation room was cold. The fluorescent light mercilessly flooded the space with a sterile, almost hospital-like hue. Celeste sat up straight, showing no emotion, her hands resting calmly on the table. She was not trying to pretend to be innocent. She was just waiting. Opposite her, carefully studying her face, sat Detective Carlos Mendoza, a man in his mid-50s with sharp features and a piercing gaze. He seemed to be searching for at least a hint of emotion, at least something that could give away her true feelings. "Celeste, we know what happened. Your daughter testified. She said you shot your husband. Do you have anything to add?" "He attacked me." Mendoza's eyebrows rose slightly. "Attacked you?" "Yes. I had to defend myself." The detective leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "You're a military man. You have experience. You could have run away. You could have taken him down without a weapon." Celeste did not look away. When you're facing a threat, you don't analyze. You act. This was the first move in her game. She realized that the key was to create a believable story, one that looks logical. If she says she acted in a state of passion, it will confirm that the murder was not planned. If she adds that he was aggressive, the version of self-defense will become more convincing. All she had to do was make the system believe that everything happened instinctively, not consciously, not intentionally. The next day, her lawyer arrived at the police station. Richard Price was one of the most expensive lawyers in the city, a specialist in criminal cases, including self-defense cases. He knew how the system worked and knew how to bend it in the right direction. He brought with him $500,000, the bail required to release Celeste on her own recognizance. He met with the district attorney behind closed doors. "Let's not blow this story out of proportion. Her military experience, self-defense, and lack of criminal record all speak in her favor." The prosecutor was in no hurry to answer. Her daughter gave confusing testimony. She did not confirm that she saw him attacking her. But she didn't deny it either. The argument was obvious. After a short pause, the prosecutor nodded. They decided not to bring the case to the public. 48 hours later, Celeste left the police station. It was already getting dark outside. Tiara was waiting by the car, her face frozen, as if carved in stone. They did not exchange a word. Celeste sat in the front seat in silence. Tiara started the car and stepped on the gas. Celeste looked out the window, watching the lights of the night city melt into the darkness. It seemed to her that everything was over, but she was wrong. The main battle had not even begun. The house remained exactly as she had left it. The same arrangement of furniture, the familiar expensive decoration, and the same oppressive silence that froze the large rooms. But something felt different. Celeste slowly walked forward, taking off her coat. There was a subtle foreign odor in the air, as if the rooms had not been ventilated for a long time. Or perhaps it was just a feeling. Behind her, Tiara closed the door without a word, never looking up at her. "I made you some tea." These words were the first she had spoken all evening. Celeste felt a slight chill somewhere deep inside. A few days ago, her daughter had stood before her, filled with fear and disgust, and now she was offering her tea as if nothing had happened. She wanted to ask why, but she held back. She just took the cup. She took a sip. The drink had a subtle, bitter aftertaste, but she didn't pay it any mind. At first it seemed like a trifle. She put it down to fatigue, which did not disappear even after a long rest. The headache seemed to be just a consequence of stress. But every day her condition worsened. The symptoms became more and more pronounced, constant dizziness. It seemed that the floor under her feet was shaking, and the world around her was blurring. Complete loss of appetite. Food no longer caused desire, only disgust. Rapid weight loss. In the mirror, she saw an exhausted face with dark hollows under her eyes. Memory lapses. She began to forget names, places, and events that she remembered to the smallest detail until recently. A strange feeling in her stomach. After every meal or even water, there was an unexplained, uncomfortable sensation. Celeste convinced herself that it was just the effects of stress. Her body had not yet recovered from everything that had happened. But Sabrina Hall, her friend, was the first to notice the changes. They met at a coffee shop a week after she was released. Sabrina literally froze when she saw her. "Celeste, what's wrong with you? You look terrible. Are you eating anything at all?" "It's just stress. I'm fine." "Are you sure?" Sabrina's eyes slid over her face, taking in every detail, every wrinkle of fatigue. "Look, I've known you for years, and I've seen you tired, exhausted. But now, this is something else. This isn't you." Celeste just waved her hand and changed the subject, but her friend's words stuck deep in her mind. What if it wasn't just the effects of nervous exhaustion? Something in Tiara's behavior began to change. She became too caring, too kind. Before, Tiara used to avoid her, ignore conversations, keep her distance. Now everything has changed. She became the attentive, caring daughter Celeste had never known. In the morning, she would bring tea to her bedroom. She offered to cook breakfast, even though she had never been interested in cooking. She made sure she drank enough water. It all seemed too suspicious. But Celeste was too exhausted to think about it. Her mind was blurring. The days were merging into one, and she had no energy left to look for an explanation. She did not know that every sip of drink, every bite of food brought by Tiara contained poison. That morning, she woke up earlier than usual. Her head was heavy. Her body seemed weak, as if it had lost all its strength during the night. For a moment, she couldn't figure out where she was until her fingers came across the cool surface of the night table. She tried to stand up, but her legs wouldn't budge. The world around her shook, and a dull, oppressive pain spread through her chest. It wasn't sharp or sudden, but rather slow, persistent, squeezing her from the inside. Celeste sat on the edge of the bed, leaned on the wall, and took a deep breath. It didn't help. When she called out for Tiara, her voice sounded weak, barely recognizable. Her daughter appeared in the doorway almost immediately. "What's wrong?" she asked, sounding neither anxious nor worried, only a steady, controlled tone. I don't know. Everything is swimming before my eyes. My head is pounding, and I can't breathe properly." Tiara took a step closer, leaned in. "You're probably just exhausted. I'll get you some water." Celeste nodded slightly, closing her eyes. She didn't see Tiara calmly walk into the kitchen, fill a glass with water, and place it on the tray next to the cup of tea her mother hadn't finished yesterday. She did not know that this tea was the reason why her body refused to obey now. Tiara came back into the room, handed her the glass, and sat down next to her. Maybe you should just lie down. Don't worry, I'm here. Celeste took a sip, but she felt even worse. Her dizziness worsened, weakness gripped her body, and it seemed as if she could no longer feel it properly. I, I'm really sick. I think we should call a doctor. Tiara held her gaze. Of course you do. Just rest. I'll be right back. She slowly left the room, but she didn't dial the ambulance until 2 hours later. She waited. She needed to make sure that her mother would not be able to recover. When she finally pressed the call button, her voice sounded scared, excited. The perfect publicity play. Please, my mom. She's not responding normally. She's really sick. Come as soon as possible. The ambulance arrived in 10 minutes. The paramedics hurriedly went upstairs. They found Celeste semi-conscious, her pulse barely perceptible. Wasting no time, they loaded her into the ambulance and connected her to an oxygen mask, trying to stabilize her condition. Tiara sat down next to her. Her fingers tightly clutched her mother's hand, and her face reflected the perfect mix of anxiety and despair. But inside, she knew that this would be Celeste's last trip. She died before the car reached the hospital. The official diagnosis was a heart attack. Her exhausted, weakened body just couldn't take it anymore. No one doubted this conclusion. A woman who had experienced severe stress, lost weight dramatically, looked exhausted. Her death seemed natural. But there was one person who could not believe it. When Sabrina Hall learned of her friend's death, her first reaction was not shock or grief. She felt rage. Something about the story didn't add up. A few days ago, Sabrina had seen Celeste. Yes, she was exhausted. She looked pale, but she remained conscious. She spoke clearly. Her mind was not clouded. It's not a heart attack. She could not accept this diagnosis. Something about it did not fit into logic. But the real suspicions came at the funeral. Her tiara was flawless. No real grief, no tears or confusion. She accepted the condolences with too much restraint, as if it were something expected, almost planned. After the ceremony, Sabrina decided to talk to the medical examiner who performed the autopsy. Tell me frankly, are you sure it was a heart attack? The man raised his eyebrows in surprise. Why do you ask? Because 2 weeks before she died, she was completely healthy. And then she suddenly began to weaken, lose weight, and forget simple things. This is not at all like a natural state. The medical examiner thought about it. To be honest, something seems suspicious to me, but we didn't run a toxicology test. There were no direct signs of poisoning. Sabrina felt anger boiling inside her. You have to do it, please. She insisted for several days, did not back down. Eventually, the forensic experts agreed. It was decided to conduct an extended toxicological analysis. Samples of tissue, blood, internal organs, everything was to be thoroughly examined. But even if it was indeed poisoning, Sabrina realized that Tiara could have acted cautiously. If she had planned this in advance, she had no doubt found a way to make sure that no trace of it was left in the blood. So Sabrina decided to take a different approach. She turned to a hacker friend who worked in cybersecurity. I need access to the phone. It's important. No questions asked. 24 hours later, he wrote to her. You won't believe what I found. And what he revealed turned the entire investigation upside down. Sabrina arranged to meet him in a small cafe on the outskirts of the city. The man waiting for her at a table in the corner looked inconspicuous, thin, about 30, with sharp features and quick, slightly nervous movements. He opened his laptop and turned the screen toward her. She turned herself in. A folder with drafts opened on the screen. Sabrina ran her eyes over the files. A detailed schedule of the poison dosage, by day and week. Notes. Mom is getting weaker. The dose is working. Another line. 3 more days and it will be done. A screenshot from the website where the poison was purchased. Search history. How to poison a person so that it looks natural. What poison leaves no traces in the blood? What is the right way to mix poison into tea? Sabrina's heart beat faster. Is this enough to get her locked up? The hacker nodded, smiling with satisfaction. Oh, yes, it is. It's even more than enough. Sabrina did not hesitate. She printed out all the materials, made several copies, and immediately handed over the evidence to the police. While Sabrina was handing over the evidence to the police, the forensic experts were completing an extended investigation. The report they produced left no doubt. Traces of a rare toxic substance were found in Celeste's blood, which acts gradually, imperceptibly, destroying the body. Tests showed that the poison had been accumulating in her body for several weeks. The symptoms she experienced before her death, exhaustion, headaches, memory impairment, were fully consistent with the effects of this substance. The medical examiner who signed the official report felt a chill run through his body. Celeste's death was not an accident. Someone had purposefully poisoned her, carefully planning every step. And now they knew who did it. Tiara did not suspect anything. She was sitting in the living room, looking over the inheritance papers. Her movements were measured, confident. She had achieved everything she wanted. Her mother was dead. The money, the real estate, the business, it was all hers now. She had won. Until there was a knock at the door. The sharp, demanding sound made her flinch. She went to the entrance unsuspecting and opened it. On the threshold stood two detectives and an investigator holding an arrest warrant. Tiara Martin, you are under arrest for second-degree murder. For the first time in months, her face lost its cool expression. The victory she was so sure of crumbled before her eyes. Her lips trembled slightly. What? Are you kidding me? We have evidence. You have the right to remain silent, but anything you say can be used against you in a court of law. For a moment, she did not realize what was happening. But when her arms were abruptly grabbed, snapped back, and cold handcuffs clicked on her wrists, panic hit her like an unstoppable wave. No, you're wrong. It's not me. You don't understand. But no one listened to her. She was taken out of the house right in front of the cameras. Journalists were already waiting at the entrance. The game she had been building so carefully was over. Now she was the victim herself. Tiara Martin sat in the courtroom, trying to keep her composure. Her lawyer assured her that the situation was not yet hopeless. If we do everything right, we can minimize the punishment. The strategy is simple. Deny everything. You have to insist that it is slander. Stay confident, but at the same time look confused and bewildered. She listened to his words and convinced herself that she could still find a way out, that she could get out, that this was not the end. But when the prosecutor began to read out the evidence, it became obvious that there was no chance left. The police presented the evidence in court. The toxicology report is the official confirmation that the death was caused by poisoning. Tiara's hacked phone. The drafts contained detailed records of the dosage of the poison and its effect on Celeste. Search history. Among the queries were the following: how to poison a person so that it looks natural. The footage from the cameras in the pharmacy, they clearly show Tiara buying drugs that enhance the effect of the poison. She was sitting motionless. Her body seemed stony, her face frozen, as if she had simply stopped feeling reality. But the biggest blow came not when the judge read out the verdict. It came later, when the family's lawyer unfolded the documents and read out Celeste's last will and testament. Before her death, Celeste Martin made changes to her legal documents. All of her assets, including $3 million and a two-story house, are transferred to Mrs. Odette Banks. A deep, almost eerie silence reigned in the courtroom. It seemed as if time itself had stopped for a second. Tiara stared in front of her, unblinking. Then her eyes widened. What? No! This is impossible! Her voice cut through space, turning into a desperate scream. This belongs to me! Me! Abruptly jumping up from her chair, she tried to break free, but the guards reacted instantly, grabbing her arms tightly, preventing her from taking a step. She couldn't have done that. She couldn't. This is a setup. But the words were useless. An official document with Celeste's signature was already displayed on the big screen in front of her. Celeste had indeed signed everything over to her housekeeper. Odette Banks sat in the courtroom, clutching a handkerchief. She never wanted the money. She was just doing her job, taking care of Celeste for years, staying by her side when everyone else turned away. And now, because of Tiara's cruel calculation, she suddenly became a millionaire. Tiara screamed and tried to break free, but she was quickly escorted out of the room. She lost everything. The next day, the judge announced the verdict. Tiara Martin has been found guilty of second-degree murder. The sentence is 15 years in a maximum security women's prison. She was led back to her cell. She was no longer screaming. Her eyes were empty, as if they had gone out. Her lips barely moved, whispering words that no one could hear but her. It wasn't supposed to end like this. It wasn't supposed to end like this. Did she have a chance to notice the threat earlier? Could she have avoided it if she had seen the signs before it was too late? Or was this betrayal inevitable?